No one has ever truly offended me. I signed the order myself and then complained about the handwriting. For years, I walked through Petersburg like a raw nerve. A stranger's hurried step became contempt. A late letter fermented into betrayal, and the most ordinary glance, especially a glance, was enough to convene a tribunal inside my skull. I called this conscience, even moral sensitivity. It was vanity with a magnifying glass. When I finally pressed my ear to the uproar, I discovered a small device humming behind it all. Not the world, but the meaning I fastened to the world with my own trembling hands. Events were simple. My commentary was carnivorous. The machine, once noticed, seemed ridiculous, like discovering the orchestra is a cracked gramophone hidden behind the curtain. Yet it had conducted my life. Take two men and present them with the same trifle. A door closed too quickly, an answer delayed too long, a cabman who splashes thaw mud onto a coat. One man devours the slight, and it consumes him in return. The other lets it pass as wind passes over a sleeve. The difference is not catechism, nor station, nor education. It is bookkeeping. The first writes the insult into his ledger in red ink with usurious interest. The second refuses to finance the drama. I used to imagine the calm man possessed some superior nervous system, some heavenly exemption. In truth, he has an account he protects. He prices his peace, while I used to give mine away like a pamphlet on the corner. You already know this illness from a certain underground gentleman who polishes his humiliation until it gleams. Hand him a dust mote of reality, and he will build a cathedral of injury around it, then kneel to worship his own conclusion. He believes he is profound because he feels so much. He is merely obedient to a story he has not examined. I recognized him because I recognized myself, the way I could turn a clerk's shrug into a philosophy of human cruelty by supper. Yet there exists another species, rarer and therefore mocked. Think of Prince Mishkin crossing the same draft of air and declining to bite the bait. He is not a man without nerves. He is a man without the habit of letting bait define his diet. Society calls him naive in order to excuse itself. I call him economical. He refuses to fund the theater. I learned something similar when I read of prisons, and later when I found the prison already lodged within me. A man survives among brutes not by becoming stone, but by training the attention like a guard who records without commentary. To observe is not to absorb. So I began, awkwardly at first, to keep a silent ledger. On the left, the event, listed as a clerk, would list a parcel, date, place, weight, no adjectives. On the right, the meanings I was tempted to assign. She despises me. I am ridiculous. They have conspired. Between the two columns, a pause, thin as a cigarette paper, but sovereign. In that interval, I examined the pen with which I would write the rest of my day. Most days I discovered that my pen was dipped not in truth, but in yesterday's resentment. When I set it down, matters improved without the world's assistance. The pause is cheap, and therefore we spend it frugally. Yet it is the only wealth that buys back a man from his reflexes. In that breath, I ask 3 questions that sound childish and save me from far worse childishness. First, what precisely was done, without embroidery, without that underground flourish that adds a staircase and a chandelier to a broom closet? Second, if I permit this meaning into the house, what will it cost? An hour, a day, my dignity. Third, if I starve this spectacle of my attention, does it die without me? 9 times in 10, yes. Malice is a stage play that that cannot begin until I take my seat. Even those grand inquisitors who barter bread for obedience require consent. The mechanism jams when the audience refuses to clap. You will tell me I am preaching indifference. I am preaching economy. My peace is legal tender in short supply. I no longer extend it at street corners because a stranger's umbrella brushed my sleeve. When I fail, and I do, I can hear the old machine begin to whir. They meant it. They always meant it. That whisper is the bait. Recognize it and do not feed it. If a matter wishes to enter, let it present papers. A truth that survives a night's sleep. A cost worth paying. A duty that would shame me if I ignored it. Everything else may wait in the snow. Perhaps this seems a doctrine invented by people who never bled. It arrived to me not from comfort, but from exhaustion. After squandering half my life on performances I mistook for reality, beneath the fever of outrage, I discovered a humbler dignity. I am not obliged to be moved by every rope that touches me. To be unbothered is not to be unfeeling. It is to be governed. A man may weep and still choose his meaning. He may forgive while keeping his doors locked. Freedom is not a throne conferred at the end of history, after the nations applaud our virtue. Freedom is smaller, private, and available. The right to title your own scene before the city does it for you. From that right follows a practice. I walk along Nevsky and the wind performs its tricks. I hear footsteps hurry behind me and refuse to compose a tragedy. A letter arrives 2 days late and I record the fact rather than the prophecy. At night I open the ledger and note where I almost caved to the old magnificence of taking offense. It is a ridiculous ceremony, and the only one that has ever worked on me. The city still sells provocations by the basket, but I have become harder to buy. I am no saint, only a doorman of my interior, and I have raised the price of admission. If you ask how a man becomes untouchable, I can only answer that he stops hiring the world to touch him. I refuse to spend my peace to purchase my pride. That is the whole reform, though it took me half a life to phrase it so plainly. Pride is the costliest appetite in the city. It eats like a gambler and then asks for a loan. Peace, on the other hand, is bread and sleep and a lamp with oil in winter. Whenever I paid for pride with peace, I woke poorer and still offended. The arithmetic is idiot-proof, and yet I miscounted for years, led by that underground vanity which would rather be theatrically wronged than quietly whole. So I began to keep prices for the traffic that wanted entry to my interior. I ceased to issue speeches. I posted tariffs. You may laugh, but it worked at once. The way a closed door works better than an eloquent plea to thieves. Consider an afternoon at the shop when a minor official, flushed with his own importance, demanded that I fetch a trivial object as if I were his servant. Formerly, I would have performed a little opera, icy politeness, undertones of contempt, perhaps a paragraph in my diary proving my moral superiority. It was delicious and expensive. This time I quoted the price to myself and to him without ceremony. I said I would be pleased to help when he addressed me correctly, and if not, he might try another shop. No raised voice, no trembling. The conversation ended because the play found no audience. He returned later, subdued by the simplest market law. Where there is no supply of humiliation, the buyer either adjusts or leaves hungry. I did not triumph. I merely kept my accounts. When people speak of becoming unbothered, they imagine an angelic temperament, a holy anesthesia. Nonsense. I have nerves enough for 3 men. The difference is that I now ask every intruder to show its papers, and most slink away when confronted with formality. 3 questions do the work. A clerk's instrument, not a philosopher's. Will this pay for anything I value by week's end, or is it merely a glittering token for my pride to rattle in its pocket? Will I remember it after Sunday dinner, or will it dissolve if I deny it my tongue for 24 hours? Is this debt even mine? Or am I being presented with another man's bill because he cannot settle with his own heart? If the intruder fails at any line, I return it to sender with a bow, as one returns misdelivered mail. The postman does not weep because the envelope looked urgent. Someone will protest that this is cold, even unchristian. I answer with a tragedy I cannot forget. The poor, gentle creature who married a man starving for control more than for love. He could not price his peace. He mortgaged it to acquire a sense of mastery over the other soul. And in the end, he collected neither peace nor mastery, only a ruin that smelled of incense and despair. You see how expensive pride is when it shops for absolute reassurance. It will paw through another person's conscience like a pawnbroker prying at a locket. The ledger I recommend is not cruelty. It is a restraint placed upon that very appetite, a refusal to fund the theater where we interrogate the innocent to quiet our own noise. If I must pay, let it be for duty and mercy. If pride wants its expensive bauble, let it pawn its own watch, not my sleep. The practicalities are simple, which is why we resist them. First, I removed arguments from the catalog. I no longer explain prices. If a man disrespects the house does not lecture. It closes a door. I learned this from households more orderly than mine. 1 sentence, 1 consequence. The first time I imposed it, my mouth longed to be brilliant. I wanted to decorate the boundary with a garland of reasons, to prove that I was reasonable, educated, even tender in my refusal. Vanity again. I shut it like a drawer. The rule holds. I do not bargain for the right to be at peace in my own rooms. When the boundary is clear, even the unruly become literate with surprising speed. They understand costs better than they understand sermons. I instituted, too, a delay which I call a night tax. Nothing expensive may be purchased in daylight fury. Let every provocation sleep once. By morning, most wake so shrunken, they slip through the keyhole and go back to the street where they belong. Those that remain after the night tax, duties, genuine reparations, apologies owed, these I handle with both hands. A man is not absolved from justice by claiming peace. He is merely spared the ruin of litigating trifles. Indeed, my peace strengthened my justice. I stopped confusing my hunger to be right with the need to be fair. The former makes noise and collects enemies. The latter writes 2 letters and goes to the post. There is also the matter of whom we allow to price us. The world is full of evaluators who pay with attention, the cheapest currency. Praise became less intoxicating once I recognized its inflation. Even the condemnation that used to draw so much of my blood has been demoted to its true denomination: the weather of other people's nervous systems. A sullen waiter is often merely a man with a small funeral inside his chest. Why should I sell him my day at wholesale because he cannot bury his dead before serving tea? When I can, I tip in excess and leave him his storm. When I cannot, I take my hat and go elsewhere. Either way, I keep the accounts balanced. Please note how pride agitates against this economy. Pride wants a scene to prove it exists. It wants the witness, the decisive phrase, the moral victory, the sigh from the gallery. It will gamble a month's quiet for an evening's applause. When I catch it at the tables, I drag it outside by the ear. There in the cold, we count. How much of my life am I prepared to wager for this glittering coin? The numbers are sobering. I have come to prefer the vulgar happiness of keeping warm. You ask whether people notice the new tariffs. They do. The low ones stop testing the gates because there is nothing to drink from me. The better ones draw nearer because the water is no longer muddy with theatrical sediment. My circle thinned and then grew healthier. An odd result for a man who once gathered acquaintances the way a hedge gathers scraps of paper, by the wind's choice, not his own. To price your peace is to choose your weather. Some days it still rains. Even so, I keep dry more often than chance would allow. Each evening I return to the ledger and record 2 entries, where I paid properly and where I overpaid. In the second column, I note the tax I will collect tomorrow. Less access, fewer explanations, a refusal to rehearse the old play. It is tedious work, homely, unbeautiful in the way good bread is unbeautiful. But bread sustains life longer than champagne, and my pride is slowly learning to eat like a citizen. If I have become a little unbothered, it is not because the city grew kind. It is because I stopped subsidizing its cruelties. I have my tariffs now. I am willing to be thought cold if it keeps the lamp burning and the door locked against the wind. Stillness is not a lack of blood. It is custody of it. I learned this too late, like a debtor who only discovers arithmetic after the bailiff has inventoried his spoons. The world prefers us excited because excited men are easy to price and easier to steer. Sellers of every sort, political, romantic, commercial, even philosophical, require our quickness. They prosper when we answer before we understand. If I seem calmer now, it is not because I have grown saintly, but because I have grown suspicious of speed. The one who governs tempo governs outcome. A man who will not be hurried already wields a kind of power that appears mystical to those trained to bark at every whistle. Observe the parlors and corridors where destinies are commonly squandered. An office where a superior fires little darts of sarcasm to keep his kingdom nervous. A drawing room where a woman's silence is interrogated until it confesses what it never intended. A committee where the boldest fool wins by exhausting the patient. I used to oblige such theaters with my best nerves. A sentence tossed across the table and my pulse would gallop. I would reply too soon and buy a quarrel I did not need. Now I spend my first coin, stillness, to purchase clarity. I let the line grow slack. Bait without tension is only a worm. In that slackness, a curious thing occurs. Other people's motives surface the way bad wood floats, and the scene, so urgent a moment ago, reveals the string and the ceiling from which it was lowered. Think of Prince Mishkin, not a marble saint, but a man who refused to be drafted into other people's tempos. They shouted, and he refused the audition. They presented him with the old melodramas that require indignation to turn the gears, and he offered instead a mild fact. His stillness worked like a mirror. In it, others saw themselves and became either ashamed or ravenous. This is the caution. Stillness without boundaries becomes a pasture that invites wolves. The lesson then is twofold. First, abstain from feeding the machine with your heat. Second, set the price of admission so that only those who do not require heat to live can enter. I learned to say, without ornament, I can speak when the tone is civil, and to leave rooms which insisted on the cheaper currency. Absence, when honest, is not sulking. It is architecture. Those who manufactured chaos in our country, demons taught me, had a simple method: compress time until men answer like powder touched by flame. They replaced deliberation with spectacle, conscience with choreography, and they won not because they were wise, but because they were fast. Refuse the choreography, and they have nothing to conduct. I have seen petty versions of this in small offices, where a little tyrant keeps everyone running by inventing emergencies that die the moment you weigh them. I have seen it in love, where a person tests you with little violences to watch you dance. The only countermeasure that does not rot the soul is stillness that keeps its sword sheathed and its door locked. When I withhold my heat, the test expires. When I pair stillness with a boundary, not in this tone, not at this hour, not in this room, the examiner either graduates into civility or drops the course. There are, for practical people, 3 levers of stillness. The first is silence used not as punishment, but as calibration. I answer only when my words would change the result. Otherwise, I let the air do the honest work of revealing who needs noise to feel alive. The second is tempo. I refuse to sprint simply because someone whistles urgent. Almost nothing is urgent that survives the night tax. A reply tomorrow morning is often more accurate and less expensive than a reply purchased with blood. The third is distance. Not exile, but inches enough to let a scene lose its theatrical lighting. Step back half a pace, physically if you must, and the spell breaks. The faces look human again. One sees, with embarrassment, that the attack was only a hungry question wearing boots. The letter is the perfect laboratory. A provocative note arrives, ink hot with insinuation, deadlines invented, virtues questioned. Formerly, I would answer with equal temperature, and thus permit the author to set not only the subject but the weather. Now I strip the letter to facts the way a surgeon cleans a wound. I remove adjectives first. They are the infection. Then speculations. They are the fever. And if anything living remains, dates, sums, a request, I respond to that and to that alone. I ask for terms, for signatures, for the thing that binds a man to his own words. Most quarrels will not accept such binding. They prefer to remain clouds that can rain or evaporate as convenience dictates. When the cloud realizes it must choose, it often chooses to be nothing at all. This is leverage, not domination, only refusal to row the other man's boat for him. I am not granite. I have felt the freight of a glance, the throb of an unjust phrase. I have returned to my cold rooms and pressed my forehead to the wooden frame and allowed the animal to pass through me. To be unbothered is not to be unmoved. It is to move privately and return governed. I permit myself 5 minutes of honest motion, the hands trembling, the prayer without grammar, and then I write the sentence that will live in the world. The distinction has saved me from 2 equal ruins: the theatrical cruelty of those who boast of never feeling, and the theatrical chaos of those who feel to be seen. If there is any holiness in me, it is the courtesy of suffering in the stairwell so that I may be just at the table. Power dresses itself loudly. Stillness looks like vacancy and is therefore underestimated. Yet in every negotiation, the clerk at the window, the landlord with his ledger, the relative with his history, the man who can slow the scene without freezing it, wins the real prize: the choice of when to end. There is a point in argument where every extra word makes reconciliation more expensive. Most people are incapable of sensing that brink because their nerves are sprinting. Stillness feels the brink arrive the way a fisherman feels weight on the line. It stops reeling, lets the water tire the fish, then draws it in without spectacle. The room will call you manipulative for mastering your breath. Forgive the room. The room was trained by carnival barkers who consider quiet an insult to their profession. Do not confuse stillness with delay used to wound. I answer promptly when duty knocks. I cross the street quickly when a child is in danger. I confess at once when I am wrong. Stillness is not a trick. It is a refusal to pay with heat when coin will do. When my conscience speaks clearly, speed is obedience. When my vanity speaks loudly, speed is servitude. The difference becomes vivid once you practice. You begin to recognize which invitations are ropes and which are roads. You accept fewer ropes. You walk more roads. It amuses me that people who once found me pliable now accuse me of chill. Perhaps I am colder, but I am also less cruel. I no longer stab with adjectives. I no longer bargain with hysterias I cannot afford. I let storms be storms without hiring them to flood my house. Those who needed my heat to feel alive went elsewhere and discovered a public square always willing to buy it. Those who wanted conversation found, in my slower speech, a dignity that does not humiliate either party. This finally is the leverage of stillness. The world reorganizes around the pace of a man who will not be hurried. The wolves grow bored, the honest draw close, and the soul, no longer shoved from bell to bell, remembers its work. If I am any calmer now, it is not because the world softened, but because I apprenticed myself to 3 plain disciplines that do not flatter the ego and therefore work. I did not invent them. I recognized them the way a prisoner recognizes a key when he finally looks at the ring hanging from his own belt. They are homely, almost clerical. Observe, pause, starve the drama. Practiced together, they turn a man from a bell that rings at every touch into a doorman who admits only what has business inside. First, observe without absorbing. I learned this discipline among the condemned, not in my body, though I have borrowed their air, but in the pages where that air clanged with chains. In such houses, survival does not depend on hardening into stone. It depends on recording the day with the cold accuracy of the quartermaster who must count bread or men go hungry. The observer writes what happened and refuses to title it with an obituary or a victory parade. I took this out of the barracks and into my street. When a slight arrives, I file it as a clerk files parcels. Who, what, when, where, nothing else. Letter delayed 2 days. Answer curt. Door shut quickly. The moment I add adjectives, deliberate, contemptuous, conspiratorial, I am no longer describing the world. I am auditioning for a tragedy. The ledger saved me from parts I did not want to play. Habit makes this mechanical. 3 lines, no commentary. If by the following night the entry still demands a response, then we respond, and we do so to the facts, not to the decorations I was tempted to stitch around them. Observation is not passivity. It is fidelity to reality before one adds the heat of interpretation. I used to fear that if I did not feel at once, I would become less human. In truth, I became less deluded. The face that looked like scorn at noon sometimes looks like indigestion by dusk. The cutting sentence reveals itself under sufficient light to be a clumsy plea for help. If I must carry burdens, let them at least be the correct ones. The observer in me is not a cynic. He is a notary. He stamps what is so that the heart does not mortgage itself to what never was. Second, the pause. Stillness is not an ornament. It is a mechanism that interrupts the reflex by which we sell our peace at a loss. I learned the pause from a quiet man whose sermons were often delivered with his mouth shut. He had a way of looking at you that separated the smoke from the person. I borrowed 3 of his breaths and made them law. In any heat, insult delivered, accusation thrown, temptation to reply with brilliance, I pay 3 breaths before I spend a word. It is not mystical. During the breaths, I ask, what precisely is required? What will this cost if I answer now versus after the night tax? What would I write if I were compelled to stand by the sentence for a year? If conscience answers, I obey. If vanity answers, I let it go hungry. The pause is not a tactic to win. It is a courtesy to truth. In certain cases, we cannot pause. When a child is at the curb and wheels are near, when a duty is clear as daylight, and then speed is a form of love. Everywhere else, delay is a form of governance. I had to learn the posture of the pause, because nerves love to counterfeit necessity. My hands touch the chair back, my eyes lower slightly, my jaw releases. The body obeys before the mind remembers. Once the body is quiet, the mind discovers that half the urgencies were only ghosts demanding rent. Letters benefit most from this discipline. A hot letter arrives, swollen with adjectives. I remove the adjectives, then the speculations, and answer what remains, date, sum, request, and if nothing remain, I answer nothing. When I hold to this ritual, the quarrel evaporates like a performance offered to an empty hall. The actor does not hate me for leaving, he goes to find an audience that pays. Third, starve the drama. Even the holiest ideas love an audience, and the most unholy systems cannot survive without one. I have seen an empire of argument erected on one man's need to be agreed with. I have seen a household held hostage by the daily demand for a scene. Drama is a furnace fed by reactions. Remove the fuel and it dies coughing like a machine denied oil. There is a parable of power in which the most devastating answer to a grand interrogation was a kiss and silence. I do not pretend to that purity, but the form instructs. A reply that neither flatters the theater nor buys a ticket often does more for justice than 100 brilliant speeches. Starving the drama is not neglect. It is triage. I ask of every invitation to conflict, is there a truth here that can be bound to terms, signed, and acted upon? If yes, we draft it. If no, we return it to the sender without ceremony. My boundary is 1 sentence plus 1 consequence. If the tone remains, the door closes. Then the door closes. No proclamations, no parade. Doors educate faster than treatises. Starving the drama also means refusing to feed it in absentia. I used to carry indignations to sympathetic friends, the way a street vendor carries chestnuts, hot, fragrant, endlessly replenished. Each retelling purchased me a small, smoldering solidarity and left me strangely emptier by morning. Now I keep a 24-hour embargo on all gossip disguised as testimony. If, after a night, a matter still needs a witness, I speak to the person who can sign it, not to the gallery that can cluck. Silence, properly directed, is not secrecy, it is diet. It trims the fat from a story until only the bone remains, and bones support weight. Taken together, the 3 disciplines feel unglamorous, like learning to mend one's own coat rather than buying another. But there is nobility in repair. Observe, and you carry the right burdens. Pause and you pay with coin instead of blood. Starve the drama, and the house grows quiet enough for thought to live there. I keep them as one keeps prayers. Morning to declare intent, noon to correct drift, night to reckon. The morning entry is short. Today I will record, breathe, and close doors without speeches. At noon, I write the one place I failed, and the next step that will make failure expensive for the appetite that caused it. At night, I put a check beside each fire I did not feed. Oddly, these little checks taste like bread. There is nothing heroic here, nothing to clap for. The heroism, if any, lies in refusing the grand gestures that satisfied my pride and destroyed my days. I no longer audition for tragedies in which I am both playwright and audience. The world can keep its stage if it insists. I have work that requires a steadier light. If at times I appear colder, understand that I am only less combustible. The city will continue inventing performances by the hour. Its posters glitter on every wall. Let them glitter. I am done renting my nerves as footlights. I will not pretend that discipline alone saves a man. It merely clears the table so truth can be served. What finally turned the lock for me was embarrassingly simple. I changed the story I was telling myself about the world, and the world, obstinate as it is, began to behave differently toward me. Do not mistake this for a child's optimism. I mean exactly what I say. I discovered that between an event and my blood, there is a sentence, and whoever writes that sentence governs me. For years I outsourced the authorship to habit, to pride, to the old, entertaining misery that lives under the floorboards. When I took back the pen, the weather changed. You have met a man who proved this to himself by dreaming a different earth and waking to find his heart redeemed enough to endure the real one. I am less gifted. I required smaller experiments. A stranger's brusque tone used to cue a familiar chapter. They despise you, defend yourself, stage a scene. Now when the cue arrives, I ask the one question that has kept me out of many ditches. What story, if I were forced to live with it for a year, would not humiliate me? There is usually such a story, sober and inexpensive. He is tired. I am not obligated. This is none of mine. I choose one and behave as if it were true. Half the time it is true. The other half it becomes true because I did not feed the alternative. Some will object that this is mere reframing. Yes, and reframing is the hinge on which prisons and gardens swing. Do not underestimate a hinge because it is small. A man who insists that every slight signifies a verdict soon finds himself living under law he wrote while angry. A man who confesses that meaning is his craft. This man becomes difficult to conquer. When I say confesses, I am not gesturing toward comfort. Confession requires that I admit my talent for melodrama and my appetite for being wounded. These are not noble tastes. They taste good, but they leave a thirst that ruins a life. There is a technique I have come to call emotional Judo, though the name is crude for a quiet art. It is nothing more than refusing to supply the power your adversary requires to perform the trick he rehearsed. A barb arrives. You are stubborn. Formerly, I would compose a defense as if a court had convened. Now I say, often to avoid changing my mind too cheaply, and continue with the work at hand. Another time, you do not care. Not enough to pay with anger, I answer, but enough to write it down and act tomorrow. You see the movement. I accept the small truth inside the insult, pivot on it, and decline the invitation to the theater. The critic loses his audience. The scene collapses under its own curtains. This is not mockery. It is thrift. When I can repair a matter with 2 ounces of self-mockery, why spend a quart of blood? There are limits. Judo is not for wolves. Wolves require doors. My cheerfulness is not a discount for aggression. A rule protects me from my worst philanthropy. Kindness that requires me to become combustible is not kindness, but vanity. If a person needs my heat in order to feel alive, I am not the physician he requires. I keep chairs for those who can sit without setting the table on fire. Had the poor husband in that bleak household learned such a distinction, he might have loved more wisely and broken nothing. He tried to own what could only be welcomed. Pride writes possessive stories. Love writes hospitable ones. The first ends in interrogation, the second in supper. Rewriting the story also means rewriting the voice that narrates my failures. That voice is ingenious and tireless. It prefers prophecy to report. You always, you never. This proves. If I listen, I become a character in its serial, doomed to repeat last week's episode. I answer it with a ledger, not a sermon. What happened? What did I do? What will keep this expensive tomorrow? Sometimes the measures are dull. Less access, fewer explanations, no midnight letters. But dull tools are the ones that build houses. When shame insists on theatrics, I make it pay a deposit. It must present a concrete action to accompany its accusation. If it cannot, I dismiss it as a gossip without standing. There is one exercise that altered me more than the rest. I call it the counter habit. Whenever an old reflex rises, defend, explain, rehearse, I perform the minimum credible opposite. If I would once have written 4 paragraphs, I write 1 sentence. If I would once have confronted at once, I send a respectful delay. Tomorrow at 9. If I would once have disappeared to nurse the wound, I remain in the room and pour tea. The body protests like a horse with too much memory. The first dozen times feel false. Then a gap appears where the reflex used to be, and through that gap, air enters. I began to recognize the faces of people, not the roles I had hired them to play in my private theater. The world did not grow kinder. It grew clearer, which in winter is better. You ask where faith enters such mechanics. Faith is nothing mystical here. It is the solemn bet that reality is more bearable than the stories I forge when frightened. There are days when I cannot manage even that. On those days, I borrow a smaller creed from a monk I trust. Do no harm you cannot repair by mourning. It rescues me from brilliant gestures and keeps my accounts solvent. Occasionally, justice demands the quick word, the risk, the confession without hope of applause. I have found that quiet makes such courage stronger, not weaker. A man who has stopped performing can afford to be brave because he is not also trying to be seen. I would like to say that freedom arrived like a trumpet. It did not. It came like a clerk with good shoes, bringing small receipts. One afternoon, I received an unkind letter and did not auction my piece to answer it. That evening, I declined a quarrel that would have sweetened my pride and soured my sleep. The next morning, I walked past an old snare and felt no tug at the ankle. Individually, these are not miracles. Together, they form a modest republic inside a single man. The laws are few. Observe, pause, starve the drama. Charge fairly for your attention. Write a story you can inhabit without shame. Keep doors and keep kindness, and never let your enemies choose your tempo. Anyone may rule such a country. Almost no one does because the throne is small and the crown is heavy when there is no audience. Do not imagine that I am finished. The machine behind the wall still whirs when I am exhausted. I hear it even now, proposing meanings, flattering me with the old theatrical voice. The difference is that I have learned where the cord lies. Some nights I cannot pull it. Then I sleep, and morning, stingy but faithful, gives me one more chance to be governed. I rise, I set my tariffs, I clean the sentence between event and blood, and I go to earn the ordinary day. That is the entire miracle. An ordinary day, unpurchased by rage, lived under laws I wrote while sane. If you are searching for a power that cannot be taken from you, begin there. Keep your pen, keep your breath, keep your doors, and when the world comes to hire your nerves, send it away with a courteous receipt and nothing else.